Welcome back to the series. I'm going through each of the years between 1959 and 2019, counting down my favorite albums for each year. We are on 1965. I've got my top 10 favorite albums for you. Again, these are just my top 10 favorites, not the ones that I consider to be the best. What's going on with my hair here? I don't know. I got distracted. So top 10 favorite albums of 1965. And I have most of these in my collection. The ones that I don't, I'll be throwing the album art up here so you can see it and be like, oh, I recognize that album. I have that. So let's just jump right into it. Number 10. Now, when I was growing up until relatively recently, maybe 10 years ago, every thrift store you went into, every junk shop you went into, every yard sale you went to, you would find a copy of this album. I don't see it anymore. I think the novelty of buying every copy that you could find of this album took over, and now it's become scarce. You can still get it for a couple bucks online, but just finding it out in the wild seems like it's no longer a thing. And most people buy this because the album cover is so iconic. But I had bought it on I'd got it on CD at one point, and I listened to it, and I was like, actually, this is really good. I'm speaking, of course, of Herb Alpert and Tijuana Brass, Whipped Cream and Other Delights. Classic album cover. Again, the music, I'm not even going to say it's a guilty pleasure. I think this is legitimately a decent album. And Herb Alpert, I need to find out more about him, because from what I've heard, he's actually a really cool guy. He's really a good guy. So Herb Alpert and I found this copy at a record store I go to in the $3 bin, and I was just overjoyed because it still has the shrink wrap on it. It's open on the side, but I thought that was pretty cool. I've never seen that before, as many copies as I've seen. So that was a great addition. Number 9, I do not have the version of this that I would like to have. I used to, but over time just sold it or something. But I do have this version. This is Son House. This is the original Delta Blues release. The album that I would like to put here is Son House's legendary 1965 sessions. This is like a trimmed down version of that album. But Son House, so one of the most important figures in blues music. He was on the scene in Mississippi with Charlie Patton when Robert Johnson would come around and ask them if, hey, can I play with you guys? And he didn't know how to play guitar at all. He would eventually, and Son House and Charlie Patton would laugh at him and be like, get out of here, kid. Robert Johnson, of course, would go on to sell his soul to the devil to learn how to play guitar. Actually, he was learning from a very accomplished musician during the few months that he went away. And then, of course, come back, record his recordings, and change music forever. But Son House was there in the beginning. And Son House recorded in Grafton, Michigan in the 1930s, along with Charlie Patton. And then he also did some Library of Congress recordings in 1941. And then he decided to just stop. He was always torn because he was a very religious, devout Christian. And blues music back then, especially in the South, was seen as the devil's music. So Son House always had this pull in him, which way to go. So he eventually gave up blues music in the 40s. He moved to New York, started working on the railroad. When the folk and blues revival in the early 60s came around, they actually tracked him down and brought Son House I don't know if they brought him back from New York or if it was up in New York, but they sat him down and they retaught him how to play guitar in the style that he used to play in. So in 1965, he was brought into a recording studio and cut a whole bunch of songs. And the passion and the fury was still there for the most part, even this is 20 years after his last recordings. And this is also really great stuff if you want to get into Delta blues, but you don't really like the tape hiss and the surface noise of the early 30s and mainly 30s recordings. This sounds crystal clear, and it's basically Delta blues music that hasn't been messed with. He's doing it in the style that he had always done it. So, Son House. Can't go wrong with Son House. Number 8, well, the classic jazz albums of all time. John Coltrane, A Love Supreme. Don't have to say too much about this album if you know it. If you don't know it, John Coltrane was in a very spiritual spot in his life. He was studying Buddhism, he was studying Hinduism, he was really getting into meditation and seeking divine. And this was his dedication to God. It's saying that you would think this is a very lovely album, and it is, but it does have a lot of dissonance in it, which I always took up to be a representative of the search. But it's an epic album. You can feel, as you're listening to it, you can feel how important it is, not just as a milestone of jazz music, but you can feel how important it was for John Coltrane to get this out of his system. Beautiful album, and obviously if you know jazz, you know this album. But if you don't know jazz, it might be something you want to kind of dip into and take a listen to. Number 7, Back to the Blues again with Junior Wells, Hoodoo Man Blues. Special guest, what do they call him on here? Originally, he was credited as Friendly Chap, but on guitar, the incredible Buddy Guy. Buddy Guy and Junior Wells made a great combo before apparently they had a falling out much later, and they, up until Buddy Guy's still with us. Junior Wells passed not too awful long ago. I guess they never really did reconcile, which is a shame. But I'm not a huge fan of Chicago blues. After Muddy Waters went to Chicago blues, and I have a long explanation for why I feel this way, but Chicago blues kind of all sounded the same to me. And but this album is a little bit different. It has such dynamic energy in it. It feels like, it pretty much is a live recording, but it has that energy, it has that spark and that excitement to it that is great. And the songs are amazing as well. Number 6, I do not have. It's hard to track down a copy of this, but it's J.B. Lenore, Alabama Blues. This album is so timeless for all the wrong reasons. I always like to think of this as a precursor to Neil Young's 2 songs about the South, Alabama and Southern Man. But this album, written from the perspective of a black man living in Alabama during the civil rights movement and before. It's incredibly powerful. J.B. Lenore has a beautiful voice, beautiful songwriting, powerful songwriting, and his guitar playing is perfection. Hard album to track down. I think it is on YouTube, though, if you're interested. That's where I've been listening to it. But very important milestone in not just blues music, but folk music, and one that tends to get overlooked a lot. Number 5, these guys are back again. The Holy Modal Rounders, this time with their second album called Holy Modal Rounders 2. Again, this CD version compiles the first album and the second album, so the album cover for the second album was not this, But second album, not as tight and not as focused as the first album, in my opinion, but still great, and they're still doing what they're doing. It's very much a side B to the first album. It sounds the same as far as instrumentation goes and production. It's just like a continuation. So again, Holy Modal Rounders, one of the best folk duos to ever grace the planet, doing what they do best. Number 4, Bob Dylan, Highway 61 Revisited. It's hard to believe that this was 1965. This always feels like a 66 or even a 67 release to me. But this was Dylan's first fully electric album, and the album that he completely sold out on, according to all the folk purists out there. Like a Rolling Stone begins the album. Like a Rolling Stone, such an important song. I remember reading that Frank Zappa one time said that if Like a Rolling Stone had been as big of a hit as it should have been, he would have given up writing rock music, because he would have felt that everything that needed to be said and done would have been done. It's pretty incredible if you think about it. But the whole album is perfect. Ballad of a Thin Man is great. Tombstone Blues, It Takes a Lot to Laugh, It Takes a Train to Cry. From a Buick 6 is on here. Yeah. Of course, the title track, Dylan at his peak. Number 3. And here's where we start to make some people upset. So number 3, Rubber Soul. Okay, yeah, but the American version of Rubber Soul. For the longest time, I thought that I was the only Beatles fan who preferred the American version of Rubber Soul. I have been seeing more people in comment sections on Facebook, actually say the same thing. They're very two different creations. Obviously, the British version is what the Beatles intended, and that's what is the official canon release. When Capitol Records got the tapes for Rubber Soul to release them in America, they were kind of going under the assumption that, you know what, folk rock is really starting to pick up and sell in America. We can change this around and take off a couple tracks, add a few tracks to make this more of a folk rock album, give it that flavor. And again, it kind of works for me. You know, the idea of taking off Drive My Car as the opening song, which is a great opening song on the British album, taking that off the album completely and opening it with I've just seen a face, yeah, which is an acoustic song. So overall, yeah. And another thing about this album that really makes it better for me, unpopular opinion, but I don't like Nowhere Man. I like the idea behind it. I just don't like the recording of it. I don't like the music of it. I think it's very weak. They jettisoned Nowhere Man off this album to put it on Yesterday and Today. So another great decision by Capitol Records. So what you're left with is just a really strong album. Not that the British Rubber Soul is bad by any stretch, but I just prefer the American version. Number 2, we're back to Dylan. He had 2 albums in 1965. They were both amazing albums. Like I said, he was at his peak at this point. Bringing It All Back Home, I feel, is a little bit better album than Highway 61 Revisited. On Bringing It All Back Home, the first side is all electric, the second side's all acoustic, and because of that you get my favorite 2 Dylan songs. My favorite Dylan song, Subterranean Homesick Blues, on the electric side, which opens the album, and the penultimate song on the album, My second favorite Dylan song, It's All Right Ma, It's Only Bleeding, on the acoustic side. That song alone, if you know that song and you know the lyrics, the fact that somebody could actually write that song amazes me. As a writer myself, I don't know how it's possible. The imagery and the rhyme scheme and all of it, the themes, just incredible. So yeah, not my favorite Dylan album. That's coming up in the next few years, but probably my number 2 favorite Dylan album of all time. And number 1, and here we go again, and this is going to be an even more controversial opinion than the Rubber Soul. My number 1 album for 1965, The Beatles, Help. You guessed it, the American version. Everybody who's a Beatles fan at this point is freaking out because why? Why would you choose this over the British version? For those of you who don't know, the British version has this is the soundtrack. So the first side is all the Beatles songs from the Help film. The second side are all other songs the Beatles were doing at the time. The American version has the Beatles songs from the film. Then in between it has instrumental songs by Ken Thorne, which were it's the music from the movie, which I love. I love those Ken Thorne instrumentals. I think they rub perfectly against the Beatles songs. Not to mention, Help is my favorite film of all time, so it reminds me of the film. And honestly, the second side of the British Help, never really been a fan of Yesterday. I don't really like Dizzy Miss Lizzy. It's Only Love, John Lennon by his own admission said it was an incredibly weak song. It was a throwaway piece of garbage. I think Act Naturally is on the second side of Help. It's really weak. The strong songs are the film songs, and coupled with the Ken Thorne instrumentals, I love it. So that is my top 10 for 1965. Next time we move on to 1966, so come back for that. In the meantime, do all those great YouTube things to support the channel because it's still relatively new. Like, subscribe, comment. Tell me why I'm wrong about these American releases because I know you want to do it, but I stand my ground on it. So come back next time for 1966 and we'll see you then.